Welcome to Kujenga. Karibu, everyone. I'm Loon.
I'm Shaba Kojo.
I'm Jermaine.
Joining our conversation on education is Dr. Agbeko-Kwasi. Karibu, Mwalimu.
Jambo, Dada. I'm Jambo Watu. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Loon? Are you all going to get all the arguing out of your system from now?
Oh, it's never an argument. It's exercise for the mind, you know.
We're discussing education. And so just to give us an idea of what it is that we're trying to introduce to our audience, Dr. Agbeko-Kwasi, please describe to us what your education was like on the continent.
First off, I think we have to have an understanding of what education is. Because when you say what my education was like in Akabulan, are you talking about formal education through school or informal education through general aspect of social interact? And what are we really talking about?
What we're really talking about is formal education through school.
Well, the formal education through school, as far as institutionalized, is Eurasian pedagogy. When we talk about what system it is, it's a Eurasian system specific to the Anglos, the British system. And so that is the educational setup, you know, from early stages in life all the way through to so-called university. I went through that, if you will, system all the way to university. First year and a half in university, then I continued in the Western Hemisphere.
Would you say that the education, the formal training that you received in these institutions was adequate for you to be in your correct Alkebulan mind?
Again, when we say, quote, adequate, we have to take a step back and really understand what education is. So what is education? Okay? Because a lot of folks throw the word education and just say, okay, you're educated, or are you educated, or you received an education, but never really understanding what is an education. Because if I'm able to do something competency-wise, let's say fix a vehicle, okay, I have competency, but does that mean that, quote, I'm educated or have an education? Okay, and then the question here is, okay, what is the difference between competency, a qualification, and a certification? So there are so many dynamics to being clear on what we are talking about. That's why I'm a bit on the sideline before answering a question. I'm like, are we on the same page, understanding what we are conceptualizing or what we are contextualizing here, so that we are not just chasing that. Exactly.
So in my current search and my current studies, I'm beginning to understand the difference or the exceptions between culturally oriented education and what the Akan or the Fanti speak of as Abaruni education, which is the foreigner's education, the colonizer's education. And in just going through the history of the thing, they did not have so-called formal Christian-oriented schools in the Akan societies prior to colonization. What each individual received was the education according to their elders and their parents in their societies. This idea of removing a child from his society, from his surroundings, from his land, to bring him into a situation where he sits inside four walls and learns a pedagogy that is foreign to his cultural makeup cannot be classified as education. It can only be classified as miseducation, taking a person outside of the group that makes him a people or that makes him a person to inculcate him into a foreigner's cultural frame of view, only to set that person then loose back on his society with his miseducation. Now he views his own society that he came from, which he was not formally educated in, through the eyes of the foreigner, and begins to assign to his own culture and his own society and his own people the same misconceptions and misdiagnoses and misrepresentation that the foreigners came in with. Does that sound familiar to you, Dr. AK?
Yeah, definitely. That sounds very familiar. And really, you've given bricks for laying this foundation. Okay, let's just be clear. Let's go through Akabulan precepts and conceptualizations here for a minute. Let's look at education. Okay, let me extend to you all that education is a desire-based socialization process that literally materializes a specific outcome that feeds realities. Okay, again, education is a desire-based socialization process meant to materialize specific outcomes that feed what? Realities. Okay? So, that is what education is. It has to meet desires. So, the entails of an educational pedagogy set to meet that desire. So now the next question is, whose desire? Okay. So then, whose desire? Then we talk about what reality. So if we are going to feed a reality, there are only three realities in this world. There's Alkebulan, there's Asia, and then there's European. Those are the only three realities. And I contextualize it and offer it to our people as cultural realities. So with the latter two, that is the Asian and the European cultural realities, we merge it to call it a Eurasian cultural reality. So then the question then becomes, for Alkebulan, whose education, whose process of socialization are we being what? Are we being literally put through, or are we allowing ourselves to be put through? Thus we speak of which desires and whose desires are we feeding, which reality. Okay, then the question can be answered and simply said, is the Eurasian. Okay, so then if we are feeding or we are being put through a process that is to literally meet an outcome that is alien or diabolically opposed to Alkebulan, what will then be the product of the quote? Educated. They will be of service to the Eurasian cultural reality. Now, don't be mistaken. You will, through the educational pedagogy, the socialization pedagogy, be given training that what? Literally develops and sharpens certain competencies. Okay? Competency is different from the quote education. Okay? Because with the competency, it's more so like the, if you will, the tool to do something. So I've received the tool to do something, but the question is, which socialization, which inculcation is literally the basis of my what? Of my functionality, or if you've been a Eurasian educated, dysfunctionality, if you are talking about an Akabulan person. So that is why you then see the product of a Eurasian education is a dysfunctional Alkebulan person. That has been the socialization process. So then I asked that the question for my sister to clarify. Are we talking formal socialization or informal socialization? Okay. So then we then pull to the formal aspect of things and say, okay, within the formal aspect, that means there is a definitive structure that is based on something called curriculum. Curriculum are literally the frameworks in which seeks to aid that process in specific stages. Okay? So then within the formal structure, when you go through the educational pedagogy of a certain cultural intentionality, you're going to get a what? A certification. That certification, having met certain what? Defined criteria, is the license to access. That is what a certification is. You get a certificate as a license to access. To access what? Platforms. That's it. But that does not mean that, quote, you are serving the interest of a what? When it comes to the people of Alkebulan, because you have a certification. No, what has your education, what has your inculcation been? So, again, let's talk then about Alkebulan education, like what you're saying. There were some that, as far as our people, there are formal instructions, non-formal instructions. That is why even when the Eurasians came to Alkebulan, they saw what? They saw very structured institutes, which they couldn't even understand the frameworks of it, that they labeled it so-called mystery systems. Okay? And that is across the continent. In the eastern, western, southern hemisphere, the Benamatapo and the like, which little people know about. Okay? So we have educational systems. We've always had educational systems, but we've not re-implemented it or restored it because what? We haven't taken the initiative to rectify the, if you will, contaminations that have been put in our respective areas and locales, and obviously with our brothers and sisters who were kidnapped from the continent. We haven't what? Brought the institutions to them to reorient them into their right mind in a formal structure. So, answering Loon's question, with that premise, did it help me meet my objective and the like? The Eurasian educational pedagogy, I studied it, okay, for a decade and a half, intimately. And that is why I was able to come to a certain realization of how systemically the educational pedagogy is literally implemented, and we achieve certain results of functionally dysfunctional people of Alkebulan who literally think a certification is a validation of their authenticity, which is furthest from the truth. So I'll ask you this simple question. Why do most people who have so-called degrees and the like seem to think behaving more like the Eurasian in mannerisms, in particular, in interest, in tastes, is an affirmation of their level of education when it comes again to people of Alkebulan descent?
He's asking you that question.
Jay.
Yeah, he's asking Jermaine.
Jay, take us.
Why are you running from that question?
No, I'm going to answer it, but I wanted to give other people an opportunity first.
Have at it, Jermaine.
Why? This is what we know. The question is dependent upon what Alkebulan you're talking about. Here in America, I mean, we have a unique history, so we've been robbed of our identity, so we had to assume an identity of our oppressor. So in turn, we have to have the same beliefs in terms of what defines our education. We had no other access to anything else.
I'm not going to say we didn't have access.
Of course not.
I think that what Booker T. Washington was trying to do, what Marcus Garvey was trying to do, was to instill in us the will to use all the resources that we had in order to shore up access to our own information. They were reminding us of the heights from which we fell. So to answer your question, though, Dr. A.K., in what I'm learning now is that the purpose of the Eurasian or the Abaruni formal education was to deculturalize and colonize the mind of those that they wished to oppress. In order to keep a people perpetually oppressed, you have to erase their memory of self. You have to make them a blank canvas that you control. And you have to set their desires to be your desires. You have to put in their mind that they share the same axiology, the same values that you share. That's part of the deculturalization of Alkebulan people, to remove their value system and replace it with your value system. Therefore, you set in them that the highest status that they can achieve is to ape you and to try to be like you in order to be of service to you. So the closer and closer you get to aping them, the more and the more they will allow paths of reward systems set up because that is how they reward you. They'll say, okay, if you continue to ape us and move away from your culture, you continue to capitulate to our will, we will continue to give you carrots for these things. Now, in our minds, we took it upon ourselves to recalibrate ourselves, to make ourselves feel only important in the paradigm of the Eurasian context. We removed our values so much from our minds that it became unimportant for us to be our authentic selves.
I disagree with that. We didn't remove ourselves. This is what we were saddled with. And I'm talking specifically about Kebelans who were stolen from the homeland and brought here.
The diaspora.
Yes.
I'm speaking about Al-Kebalan who remained on the continent and were put under colonial rule.
I'm just thinking that's important, though, to know that distinction, right?
Yeah, it's important to make that distinction. So in my point of reference, I'm speaking about Al-Kebalan people who remained on the continent, endured the Ma'afa, and were still ultimately colonized and put under the same strain that we were put under. Although they were on their own lands, their rights as human beings were removed from them on those lands. We're speaking about the same family, but two different experiences. But I believe you were going to get in on that, Dr. AK, just to elaborate.
Yeah, let me hear Sister Loon's response.
Everything he said.
Oh, boy. You see, that's why I didn't want to. She does this. Oh, my God.
I just want to make sure because, we have listeners who are not necessarily familiar with, as much familiar with what's happening on the continent as opposed to what's happening in their everyday lives here.
Yeah. So to preface this conversation, we are speaking about Al-Kebalan people who are by and large, and hopefully this is the lens that I'm looking through today, since we have Dr. AK with us, who is from the continent, and trying to give our listeners who are here in the Americas a lens to look through at what people on the continent are experiencing, were experiencing, have experienced, and will continue to experience. And it looks very much the same. I do want to point that out, that although the experiences were different, particularly with Middle Passage, and the Al-Kebalan people who remained on the continent didn't necessarily go through Middle Passage, but the brutality that was inflicted on them was no less wicked. They were just spared Middle Passage at some point, and they still had, by and large, their ancestral lands close to them that they could visit. They didn't necessarily end up owning it in the end, or didn't have the will to manage it, especially under colonial rule. But now, we're in a place, and I'm sure we'll discuss this later, called independence, which also in and of itself is its own subject that we will need to cover, whether in this conversation or something in the future.
Since you wanted my input, I'm going to say that I believe that those that go through a Eurasian educational system see to mimic Eurasian mannerisms as the height of their achievement is because the whole system, the whole process was designed for servitude. And so that is an indicator that they have been successfully socialized.
Yep. 100. I mean, all 3 points, let me touch on a few things. And definitely there are some elements to what we are saying that which all 3 hit. Okay. One something that was said as far as stolen. Okay. Stolen from us. When one hears that term, it begs the question. I'm in my 40s, okay? And I don't know, most of you probably are also in your 40s and the like. Those who are alive with breath today, maybe all things constant, they are in their 80s, 90s, as far as maximum life. You have the exceptions where maybe in 100 and something, whatnot. Okay, great. So what does that signify? That signifies, okay, if you're in your 90s and the like, you are literally have been existing for almost 4 generations, including yourself. Generation meaning every 25 years, okay? If we're in our 40s, we are worth almost 2 generations, okay? I'm closer to 50 than I am away from 40. So, that said, when it's all said and done, when we say stolen, who stole what? Are we saying a person stole something? Because for us alive today, if something has been stolen, We damn well know other things. But how come we don't know the things that we state have been stolen? Because this mind we don't own. We don't own this mind. So it's not like, again, somebody has stolen something from me and then I know that it's been stolen. I know exactly what it is. And then I'm expecting that person who stole to give it back to me. My question then, you have to ask me, why don't you go and take it? Because you know he stole it. So why don't you go and take it? You want the thief to bring it back to you? No, it's not happening. So then the next question I have to ask myself, or you have to ask me is, are you scared of responsibility, brother AK? Because going to take it requires responsibility from your end. You want this thief to bring it to you, it's not going to happen. So when we say our language was stolen, our clothing was stolen, our whatnot was stolen, okay. But by the people alive today, no. By a process authored by what? The people representative of a what? Of a pedagogy, which I, yes, have subscribed to in a subservient mental state. So as a crutch, I would say it was stolen, it was taken, it was, okay? But then as a need for responsibility, you have to ask me, why don't you take it back? What stops me from learning a language of Al-Kabulan? I don't need to go to school and pay someone. What stops me from wearing clothing of Al-Kabulan? I don't need to, I don't need to be put to my head to do. What stops me? But mind you, I do know who Beyonce slept with yesterday, whose money was, who Jay-Z got money from, and all. I know all those things. But I don't know a language of Al-Kabulan because I don't have my right mind. And nobody who is a benefactor of a problematic state is the one going to reinstate a solution to the problem. So that is what we have to understand. To win away from this was taken, this was granted. What are we doing? What are you doing? What am I doing to take it back? Beginning with what? My household. That's the first thing. The second thing, like you rightfully mentioned, yes, experiences occur in different contexts, but the outcome of the authors of those experiences is the same. What does this translate to? 1 plus 6 is what? 7. 7 plus 0 is what? 7. 4 plus 3 is what? 7. 5 plus 2 is what? 7. Remember, education leads to what? It's a desire-based what? Orientation. So the outcome will be the same. So what my brother said, very true. Our brothers and sisters who were kidnapped off the continent went through certain experiences. Variables were 4 plus 3, yes. 5 plus 2, yes. 6 plus 1, yes. 7 plus 0, yes. But the outcome was still what? Eurasian subservitude. And the need to think that the beneficiaries or the instigators or the perpetrators or the propagators of what? A polluted mindset are the ones supposed to what? Decontaminate the mind. It's not happening. So my extend again to a people of Al-Kabulan, like what Brother Shabakodo mentioned. Colonization. What colonization? The Eurasian contaminates. There's no colonization. They talk about colonization because what? They justify and rationalize their parasitic what? Nature. When a parasite gets in you, when a bacteria gets in you, it feeds off you. That is the Eurasian cultural reality. It's a parasitic based reality. The condition a parasite leaves its host is what? A weakened state. A parasite doesn't get in someone to literally make it better. It gets in someone to weaken it so that it can what? It can live. So the educational process is but a tool of that weakening process. When it's what? Eurasian authored. So then when we get to having to understand, okay, what is my, again, responsibility as a person alive today in my 40s, with give or take all things constant, I want 30 or 35 more years. What am I going to contribute to the rectification process of certain things that have been identified as needing to happen for a people beyond myself? That is what is going to inform what a quality education should be for a people. I should know this. But if I'm with the mindset that they stole, how am I going to ever get to the mindset of needing to what? To take accountability, responsibility, to begin to what? To purify and decontaminate my mind, number one. Number two, if I think a parasite, I need a parasite more than a parasite needs me, I got issues. You don't need a parasite. As I say, a horse does not need the rider. The rider needs the horse. But the horse has to be broken in to think that it needs what? The rider. So that is, again, the educational process. What I call really the three sectors of influence, social structural influence, being education, religion, and what? Political. That is what the Eurasian calls it. We verify it as what? Governance, spirituality, and what? Intelligence. Intelligence is the application of what? Of learned knowledge. That translates into wisdom. So these are things that people have to relearn. And it has to be taught. So like what my good brother is saying, when I know something is stolen and it's mine, I'm going to take it back. That's the first thing. We are not playing. I'm going to take it back. So my question is, how then do you go about taking it back?
Wait a minute. Are we interviewing you or are you interviewing us?
It's a discussion, my sister. For like my brother is saying, that our brothers and sisters in different locales.